our non-human kin. In my feminist response to the proliferation of discourse on endangered environmental futures, I examined the rhetorical and narrative aspects of scientific representations of species extinctions due to climate change. I approached the scientific subfield of extinction biology as a critical insider, both fluent in biodiversity research and acutely aware of the political and ethical consequences of scientific claims for vulnerable human and non-human communities. In this talk, I confront two case studies of scientific representations of the inextricability of the future of biodiversity and our own species. These case studies propose two contrasting models for the relationship between anthropogenic species extinctions and the future of the human species in an ever-warming climate. First, I analyzed the rhetoric of male extinction. That rhetoric narrates stories that mobilize cultural anxieties about the future of gender and sexuality in the era of climate change. One example is a surprising resonance between climate fiction films and scientific research on the impending extinction of sea turtles. Both characterize the threat of climate change as the possible creation of an all-female future. Second, I examined the emerging research on the alarming loss of coral reef ecosystems through ocean acidification. This research describes the threat of climate change as extinction cascades or chains of extinction. Such portrayals, I argue, more accurately and powerfully convey the threat of climate change than narratives focused on the peril of individual species, or more often the peril of one sex of that species. Ultimately, I argue that biodiversity loss and human futurity are intimately related, but not in the way portrayed by dominant discourse. Part 1, male extinction. In the 2018 climate fiction thriller Annihilation, women scientists lead an exploratory mission into the Shimmer, a rapidly expanding dome-like structure in the wilds of Northwest Florida that's under military investigation due to possible threats to national security. The main character, Lena the biologist, joined the mission in hopes of saving her soldier husband, Kane, who was lost during a military expedition but is now found in critical condition. The audience later learns that the Shimmer is diffracting, mutating, hybridizing, and fluctuating the genetic code of all life forms, human and non-human, in its vicinity. In a key scene, a colossal, partialized, fossilized bear stalks towards the team, growling and pacing around the immobilized women. The bear, with blood dripping from its fossilized jaw, opens its mouth and screams, help me," in the voice of one of the scientists who'd been killed by the creatures of the Shimmer. Narrowly escaping the bear, Josie the physicist reflects on previous events in an opulent Edenic garden filled with plants growing in anthropomorphic shapes due to their uptake of human Hox genes. She muses, I think as she was dying, part of her mind became part of the creature that was killing her. Josie then walks into the thicket of the garden with plants growing from multiplying cuts all over her body. At the denouement of the film, Lena kills the alien life form responsible for the refraction of DNA and reunites with her husband, who recovers after the dissolution of the Shimmer. As the two embrace, their irises move, suggesting continued fluidity and mutation of the genetic code, and each admits to the other in whispered hushes that they are not the same creatures who entered the Shimmer. The Shimmer, it seems, will be in all of us. The film confronts cultural anxieties that humans could bring about the extinction of their own species. In it, the Shimmer's hybrid biota represents the possibility of annihilation not just of human nature, but also of humanity itself. This theme is extremely timely. Both scientists and the public have a growing awareness that we are in the midst of a biodiversity crisis. The scientific consensus since the late 1990s is that humans have irreversibly impacted the health of Earth's ecosystems, and as a result, species are disappearing at unprecedented rates. If these trends continue, half or more of all biodiversity could be lost within decades. In a 2017 scientific article with the same title as the film, biologists announced that Earth is facing, quote, total biological annihilation via the ongoing sixth mass extinction, end quote, in which climate change could become the most deadly assault on the future of all life, including humans. Concern over the possibility that human extinction has driven the burgeoning extinction rhetoric in the sciences, from the inclusion of Homo sapiens on the IUCN Red List of threatened species, to media articles with titles like "Lost Boys, in a Warmer World Will Males Die Sooner?", which pose human males as themselves honorary members of the endangered species list. In the film, the threat of human extinction looms large in the form of a hybrid bear monster. The refraction of the genetic material within the shimmer suggests that the DNA of the bear and the murdered scientist was hybridized at the moment she died, resulting in a mutated bear species that co-opts human speech for its own ends. Based on the bear's partially fossilized form, as well as its morphological likeness to a bear species that went extinct during human invasion into North America during the Pleistocene, I read the hybrid monster as representative of the element of nature that is threatened by anthropogenic species extinction. The bear-human monster personifies the disorderly, disruptive, and dangerous aspects of nature that cannot be subdued by the modernist forces of science and technology. Instead, it returns from the grave as an undying extinct species determined to enact its revenge. Nature threatened is rebellious, not enchanting. At stake when the hybrid monster threatens the heroine with the voice of her dead companion is the possibility that non-human nature will not only hunt and haunt the species responsible for its death, but will ultimately survive beyond the lifespan of the human through the queer necropolitical assimilation of the human back into the raw material of Mother Nature in service of a blasphemous birthing of a hybrid monstrous species. When Lena survives the hybrid monster's attack and returns home with her husband, the audience is confronted that the preservation of the reproductive futurity of the human species is maintained. Yet, the flirtation with the continued genetic mutation at the end of the film reminds us of the fragility of the definition of the human predicated on the maintenance of the heterosexual reproductive bond. As I parse the grammar of extinction, I find that scientific and popular depictions of contemporary environmental crises are riddled with anxieties about gender, sexuality, and reproduction. In my feminist response to extinction rhetoric, I critique climate fiction's reliance on heteronormative values of reproductive futurism to conjure support for environmental politics. The film teaches me that in the context of the cultural imaginary of biodiversity loss, ontologies of gender, sexuality, and species are not stable. They are threatened, perverted, hybrid, slippery. The film's portrayal of extinction in gendered and sexualized terms resonates with ecological studies of endangered sea turtles that suggest that global warming could skew the sex ratio of turtle hatchlings towards a female-dominant population, and ultimately caused extinction through feminization. Unlike humans, the sex of sea turtles is determined by the temperature of the sand in which their eggs incubate, with warmer temperatures leading to more female hatchlings and cooler temperatures to more males. Biologists are concerned that warming temperatures could lead to all or mostly female populations and demographic collapses. The most cited scientific study on the topic uses sex ratio data to show that green turtles feeding in the Great Barrier Reef, who originated from warmer northern beaches, were 85% female or extremely female biased. The researchers conclude that, quote, complete feminization is possible in the near future, which would result in extinction. The media make the supposed connection between turtle studies and the future of human gender and sexuality more explicit. Take, for example, a BBC article announcing that climate change is ruining sex lives. The article begins with the case of sea turtle populations that are, quote, heavily skewed in favor of females, progresses through case studies of global warming's impact on sexual systems across species, noting that climate change, quote, bends the rules of attraction and causes infidelity among monogamous mammals. The article concludes by connecting this research to reduced human libido, decreased human fertility, and ultimately ultimately to the threat of selective abortion of male fetuses in utero, which would produce, quote, female biased sex ratio in newborns. Similarly, an article titled, "Will Climate Change Make Men Extinct?" published by the environmentalist online newspaper Climate Desk, describes the impact of climate change on human populations in terms of a sex war, or competing futures for masculinity and femininity. Who's going to win, evolutionarily speaking, men or women? According to the article, male fetuses are especially vulnerable to environmental stressors. Women tend to miscarry male fetuses during warmer weather, and baby boys who survive gestation tend to have lower life expectancies. As the authors ask, will climate change give rise to a female super race? A 2008 study conducted by UC Berkeley-based research team headed by Ralph Catalano argues that women have evolved by natural selection to abort frail male fetuses when subjected to environmental stress. The team used data from Denmark, Finland, and Norway and Sweden to suggest that unexpectedly cold ambient temperatures result in the abortion of males in utero, ultimately causing more female than male births. Catalano generalizes these findings to claim that global climate change will, quote, affect the characteristics of human population by influencing who survives gestation. So, cultural and scientific representations of species extinction rely upon certain rhetorical devices to express a shared anxiety about the future of gender, sex, and sexuality. This discourse relies on a metonymic structure that reduces the complexity of climate change's threats to the possibility of a feminized future. In the film Annihilation, the failure of the all-female expedition would result not only in the immediate death of Lena's husband, but also the extinction of all humanity, thus portraying contemporary male fragility as narratively inextricable from the human species' uncertain future in the era of climate change. The turtle sex ratio studies describe the threat of climate change as a process of feminization in which a female-dominant or female-biased population are narratively equivalent with the living dead, or a species doomed to extinction. Contrast those two descriptors with such alternative and arguably more neutral phrases such as temperature-induced uneven sex ratio, skewed sex determination, or reduced reproductive opportunities. Phrases that not only refuse the gendered metonymy, but also better encapsulate the biological mechanism behind the decline of turtle populations. Portrayals of species extinctions in terms of sex wars expose the dominant discourse investment in protecting populations from feminization and preventing, frankly, the loss of male dominance and power. It seems as though patriarchy itself has authored the metonymic structure between feminization and extinction. The film and representations of turtle extinction also share a metaphoric structure that compares the future of endangered species with that of the human species, and normative human gender and sexuality in particular. The film, in using the hybrid shared biologies of the creatures of the shimmer and the fluctuation of the scientist's genetic material, establishes a parallel between the threatened status, let's see. Here we go. Sorry about that. Okay, it establishes a parallel between the threatened status of both humans and non-humans under climate change. It cleverly perverts the genetic species concept, not as a means to establish differences of natural kind, but instead as a vector for shared precariousness of all exposed to climate change. At the same time, the BBC article provides a representative example of the argumentative structure that marshals wildlife biology research to speculate about the threats to human gender and sexuality. The article begins with alarming statistics from turtle studies, builds a body of evidence across taxon, and then culminates in speculation about the future of human gender and sexuality. However, such an implicit analogy between human and turtles cannot be defended because these two species just have vastly different modes of sex determination. Temperature plays a direct causal role in turtles, but not in humans. Yet the article demands that the reader simultaneously imagine a future without sea turtles, fertility, monogamy, human libido, babies, and ultimately human men. The threat of climate change is the projected queering of heterosexual reproduction, the norms of masculinity, and the inevitability of male dominance. Masculinity becomes itself an endangered species. So part 2, Extinction Cascades. The problem with male extinction rhetoric is that it obscures the true cost of global climate change. Consider coral reefs. Coral reefs are the most diverse ecosystem in the world, providing habitat to innumerable species, including 1/4 of all saltwater fish and many endangered marine mammals. So it's alarming that since 2016 alone, 20% of all coral reefs have been lost to global warming. And scientists predict that all of the reefs will be lost within 20 years. Coral reef biologists are currently documenting widespread coral bleaching, in which warming weather causes stressed coral to expel their photosymbionts. Without their algae, the corals starve, turning vibrant oranges, reds, and purples, and finally to a ghostly white when they die, decay, and disintegrate. Scientists warn that oceans are approaching a thermal tipping point, when irreversible and rapid population declines and extinctions in coral reefs will occur. An emerging area of extinction biology describes this process as runaway extinctions, co-extinctions, chains of extinctions, and extinction cascades, concepts that are paradigmatic of the trend to characterize biodiversity loss in terms of disruptions at the ecosystem level rather than at the level of individual species. As the chains of extinction lengthen, the number of species lost increases exponentially, ultimately resulting in the biological impoverishment of the ecosystem itself. This is what the rhetoric on male extinction misses. The endangered green turtle will go extinct regardless of its sex ratios if ocean acidification and coral bleaching destroy their foraging grounds. This projected cataclysm is in addition to the enormous economic and cultural costs of coral reef bleaching, which disproportionately impact low-income and Aboriginal communities. Healthy coral ecosystems provide food and jobs to 500 million people globally, including the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, who are the traditional owners of the Great Barrier Reef. Without coral reefs, we face a world with more food insecurity, more extreme weather, more poverty and inequality, and less natural and cultural diversity. In summary, climate change creates conditions of shared interspecies vulnerability, in which biodiversity loss hurts those who are least responsible for climate change first and most severely. We must ask ourselves what stories are told and not told about the inextricability of the future of biodiversity and our own species, whom these stories benefit, and whose narratives they occlude or silence. The true cost of global climate change is not the loss of individual charismatic species, the selective abortion of male fetuses, or the feminization of the future, but the destruction of entire natural cultural worlds and the diverse humans and non-humans who depend on them. My feminist response to the biodiversity crisis is to become a storyteller for earthly survival. I argue that we must intervene in narratives about biodiversity loss that misrepresent the inextricability of social and ecological justice and theorize for more livable worlds for vulnerable human and non-human communities. If we want a world with coral reefs and all whom they nurture, we must learn to tell the story differently. Thank you.